Well, sports itself, it's business, and we bring that particular aspect to you even as we tell you that Manchester City has been charged with breaking financial fair play rules over a 9-year period, which started in 2009, culminating to 2018. Now, they have also been charged with failing to cooperate with Premier League investigations into their finances. And according to Premier League, the financial fair play rules are designed to ensure clubs pretty much spend what they earn. Among the charges against City are that they didn't fully disclose the financial remunerations that were made to one of their managers over a 4-year period. The suggestion is that there was a secret contract, so one of the managers was getting paid much more than officially stated, and there were other financial infractions as regards payments on some players as regards what was eventually declared or what was made public. Now, Nkobile Ndlovu, Director, Cash and Sports from the Sports Research and Advisory, joins me this morning to talk about this. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So kindly help us break down how Manchester City actually broke financial fair play rules over the 9-year period that was stated.
So the kind of rules that Manchester City or City have broken are rules with regards to inflating sponsorships, in that they would have the value of those sponsorships inflated such that they raised the income level that Manchester City was able to get from those sponsorship over a large period of time. There's other rules around having paid a manager named Roberto Mancini to consult for an entity that was owned by the Abu Dhabi investment group, and using that vehicle to inflate his salary, and thereby paying him more, but also making it seem as though he was being paid less, but paying him an additional amounts through these consultations. There's also issues around cooperation with the investigations of both UEFA and the Premier League, because remember, the Premier League as a signatory of UEFA requires clubs to comply with UEFA statutes and rules, and that failure to comply with UEFA, they were also charged for by the Premier League, because if you recall in the past, they have been charged by UEFA. And even though in that case they were essentially found guilty, they got away with it on a technicality.
So you just talked about inflation in contractual agreements with some brands and one manager, Roberto Mancini. And of course, one would want to ask the question, what actually gave Manchester City that impetus? And the fact that they did not even comply with regulations, is it a larger-than-life attitude coming from such a club? What actually would you say fueled that egotistic tendency?
Well, I guess it's also because at the time that they were first charged, the Premier League hadn't really had a firm stance on financial fair play. Financial fair play is only really being properly started to be implemented, I would say, in the last maybe 2 to 3 years. If you look at the likes of Everton, Nottingham Forest, and the likes who have been given points deductions, the Premier League hasn't been stern enough in terms of enforcing financial fair play rules, and that's what I think is kind of the issue, is that everybody thought that the rules were there, but they could be flouted, and Manchester City took it almost to an extreme by using and kind of circumventing the rules to inflate their revenues. And once they got away with it at UEFA level, I think they just felt like they could continue and there wouldn't really be any proper repercussions. But now it seems that the Premier League is trying hard to try and make sure that they do, wrap Manchester City over the knuckles and actually impose some proper sanctions, because ultimately, if nothing happens to Manchester City, it will just open the floodgates for everyone else, and it will be chaos in football if there's no real repercussions for as you said, these reckless infractions by Manchester City. And these are still allegations, by the way. We don't want to be in trouble with Manchester City lawyers coming at us, but for all intents and purposes, there is almost some certainty that Manchester City are basically guilty of financial
infractions and all. Yeah.
should we say mismanagement? Yeah.
Okay, so during the period under review, Man City, who have actually come out to deny their allegations or the charges leveled against it, won the Premier League 3 times, within that period. And this would technically mean that the defeats recorded were hugely possible due to this unfair financial advantage that it had during that period, and not necessarily because of the pedigree it has built over time. I don't know if you agree with that postulation.
It is possible that because let's not forget, Manchester City has built a world-class squad. And you can't take away from them the fact that they've built a squad, and you still have to play the matches. So it doesn't really matter whether I'm of the view that regardless of the stuff that happened, in the boardrooms and so on, they still have to go out and win the matches. So I would argue to say that they have done well in winning those matches and winning those league titles, and other teams could have similarly built squads, that are that competitive. It's just the scale at which they did it when the Saudi, well, the Abu Dhabi royal family came on, was unprecedented at the time, and nobody could keep up, and it allowed them to quickly usurp everyone else. That, I think, is the contentious bit, to say, they blew everyone out of the water in terms of what they were doing in the transfer market at the time, and nobody else could keep up with the pace that they were doing it at, which kind of led them to be able to win those 3 titles in almost quick succession when these transgressions were taking place.
Okay, without being biased, probably permit me to play the devil's advocate here. Now, it's been speculated that Manchester City did not intentionally seek to circumvent financial fair play rules, and that there were errors or probably misunderstandings with the club's finances. So do you buy the argument?
I don't buy the argument. Firstly, they've refused to cooperate with both investigations. If they weren't guilty, why did they get found? They did get found guilty by UEFA of refusing to cooperate. So if you weren't guilty, why are you hiding? That's my first argument. The second one is the issues around UEFA, and the reasons why UEFA couldn't charge them isn't necessarily that they weren't guilty, that some of the infractions had passed the statutes of limitations, and that it was too late. By the time that Der Spiegel came out with the football leagues that exposed these issues around Manchester City, they couldn't be retrospectively fined because the what had happened too long ago. So therefore, UEFA couldn't actually charge them. But UEFA never said that they were not guilty. The Premier League has also then said that Manchester City has also, in their investigation, refused to cooperate. So there's a lot of stuff being hidden. And I think, actually, because the Premier League doesn't have a statute of limitations, then they can go back as far as they want, which is why this investigation has taken so long. I think that there will be some sort of guilty verdict that comes out.
Yeah, and a few speculations around the fact that because they failed to comply, and that is why it seems as though the handlers, so to speak, either in the European angle or probably in Premier League, are more, determined to see through this course as regards this time. Because Manchester City is not the only club that is faced with financial impropriety, so to speak, of this violation of the FFP. But then it seems as though there's a deliberate searchlight being pointed at Manchester City at this point. So I'm wondering, how grave do you think this would be in terms of the consequences against Manchester City? Is there a possibility that they could get relegated from the Premier League? Because I know some other clubs will be smiling at that. I'll be hoping for that.
It is possible because they did it over such a long period of time. I mean, essentially, you're tallying up all of these infractions over so many years. You have to have a very stern the consequences have to be stern in order for you to send a message to the rest of the league. And if you look at the kind of fines that have been imposed on clubs within the league already, Everton has been docked points twice. Leicester City got away with a docking of points on a technicality, but I think the Premier League is hell bent on making making sure that they make an example. And the biggest example you can make is of Manchester City. It would be very difficult, I think, for the league to just relegate them because, ultimately, I think that would be very challenging, but there would be very, very significant points deductions and quite possibly stripping them of some of those three titles because of where those three titles landed them in the league. But it is very difficult. I personally don't think that they would relegate them. I think they would impose massive deductions and massive financial fines, but I don't know about a relegation. I think that's a very, very big step, and I'm not sure that the league is ready to take that type of a step.
Okay, is there a certain bias in terms of preferential treatment on the part of Premier League managers towards Manchester City? A couple of weeks ago, there were talks around one of the referees, Michael Oliver, I want to believe, being on the payroll of Manchester City, and that actually influenced a couple of decisions he took in a few games which he actually did referee. So I'd like to take your thoughts on that because we're talking about a powerhouse when it comes to spendings in the Premier League, and we need to fact check this and be sure whether or not there's some sort of preferential treatment, of course, being given to Manchester City.
I wouldn't say that there's preferential treatment from the referees. I think in England it's quite well known what referees support which clubs, and the Premier League even goes as far as removing referees from being able to officiate, teams and involving teams, officiate matches involving teams that they support. So I don't think necessarily that there is a sort of preferential treatment to Manchester City. I think that Manchester City have got very good lawyers, and they've managed to get themselves out of this issue time and time again when it has come up, and they are taking the very best of the best lawyers to fight with, on this case at the moment. So I think that they're going to try their very best to get away with it. But I don't necessarily think that there's a preferential treatment for them specifically. I think there's been kind of a standard treatment of most clubs in the Premier League in terms of refereeing. But the very difficult issue is the fact that this financial mispropriety was kind of hidden for a long time until it came out in the football leagues, and then UEFA tried to sanction Manchester City, but they got away with it on a technicality, and now the Premier League is trying to bring down the hammer on them and hit them with the full might of the law. We'll have to wait and see. They've already started the hearings now, so let's wait and see what comes out of that.
Okay, so talking about bringing down the armor on them and sanctions being handed out to them. Of course, you talked about the club having points deductions coming up by the time we hear the final verdict of this particular investigation, and possibility that they might be paying a fine. Do you think that could in a way affect the club's financial stability and probably the Premier League too?
I don't necessarily think that it would affect the club's financial stability because, there's almost a limited source of funds that they have access to. So Manchester City, I don't think will be losing any sleep around.
But then if it doesn't affect them, if it doesn't affect them financially, then what's the point? They need to feel the impacts of the infractions or the allegations leveled against them, don't you think?
No, I would absolutely agree with you. I think the best way to punish Manchester City would be a relegation, very similar to what happened with Juventus when they were found to be, Juventus were properly guilty of cheating and bribing referees, which is why they got relegated to the second division in Italy. That would probably send the biggest message to Manchester City, far bigger than anything else, because if it's cash, they don't care about cash. If it's point deductions, they won't relegate. They might not win the league for that for the 1 year in which they deducted points, but it wouldn't really make much of a difference to them because they've got such a strong team. So I think the biggest message would be relegation, but I'm just not sure whether the Premier League is brave enough to do it. The Italians did it with Juventus. I'm not sure that the Premier League is brave enough to do a relegation, but okay. If they really need to send a message, they need to send a really strong one, and I think relegation will probably be the good call.
Okay, so we know what path, the trajectory the Manchester City case is going. We also know that Everton was actually docked for 10 points by the Premier League in November 2023 for breaching the financial fair play rule. Even Nottingham Forest was also in the mix. And Chelsea at some point was mentioned for having also breached, the FFP. Now, I'm looking at Chelsea as it speaks, or as it is right now. Where would you say the pendulum will swing for Chelsea?
I think Chelsea will be fine. I think they've been very clever in the way that they've done their transfer dealings. What Chelsea have done is that they've given their players very long-term contracts and amortized or spread out the cost over up to 8 years. And it's allowed them to get away with financial fair play requirements. What they did get sanctioned for was trying to use a selling of a building and property to try and stimulate or enlarge their cash reserves for the club, and they were kind of sanctioned against that. And then the Premier League also stopped them from being able to give players these long-term contracts. But they've already done it. So even if the Premier League wanted to sanction them on that, they can't do it because it wasn't illegal for them to give players 8-year contracts in any case. So Chelsea Football Club were very clever in the way that they did their financial dealings. And I don't think that they will be sanctioned, but I do think that it's a very big risk that they're taking, giving these young players massive contracts. And I think in the long term, it could come back to bite them because they're trying to buy an academy and pay crazy money while giving young players who are not tested huge fees and long contracts. There's no guarantees that those bets are going to pay off. And I think that Chelsea might find themselves with some big problems if this transfer strategy doesn't pay off.
Okay. Okay. Well, one other thing I'd like to say on the show at this time is to say thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. We really appreciate that. Ngobile Ndulovu, Director, Cash and Sports, Sports Research and Advisory. It was nice talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.